It was just another quiet Tuesday aboard the Harmony Prime space station, orbiting far beyond the asteroid belt, where representatives from over 100 worlds gathered to talk, trade, and try not to accidentally insult each other's sacred customs. Earth had been part of this galactic council for almost 30 years, not as a major player but more like a polite guest who always arrived on time, listened carefully, and never raised their voice. Most species barely noticed humans unless they needed someone to fix a broken translation matrix or explain why Earth music sounded so weirdly emotional. That day, Ambassador Lin Zhao stood in the Cultural Exchange Chamber, a softly lit dome with floating data orbs and walls that shifted color with the mood of the room. She wasn't expecting anything dramatic. The agenda was routine: update planetary registry entries, share folktales, maybe swap recipes. The Qatari archivist, a tall, slender being with iridescent skin and 6 slow-blinking eyes, floated gently toward her. Through the universal translator, its voice came out calm and precise. "Honored delegate," it said, "we are standardizing planetary designations across the archive. Your world is listed only as Earth in common usage. But every world has a true name, the one it carries in its oldest records. Would you share yours?" Lin hesitated for just a second. Back home, nobody really used the old names anymore. They belonged to history books, poetry classes, or late-night documentaries about how messy humanity used to be. But this was protocol, and Earth had nothing to hide, or so she thought. "Our scholars sometimes refer to it as terra sanguinis," she said, pronouncing it carefully. "It's Latin, from an ancient Earth language. It means land of blood." She added the translation almost as an afterthought, expecting a nod, maybe a polite note in a database. What she didn't know was that in the galaxy's oldest tongues, certain phrases weren't just words. They were warnings. The Qatari archivist didn't move. Its eyes stopped blinking. The floating data orb beside it flickered red for half a second, before returning to soft blue. No alarm sounded. No one shouted. But something shifted in the air, like the moment before a storm hits and even the birds go quiet. Lin didn't notice at first. She smiled, tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, and asked if they needed pronunciation files. The archivist replied with perfect courtesy, thanked her, and drifted away. But within minutes, encrypted alerts zipped through the station's secure channels. Linguists on 3 different decks dropped their datapads. A Mircon security officer, normally calm as deep space, nearly crushed a bulkhead handle in its clawed grip. Because terra sanguinis wasn't just a poetic relic. To many in the galaxy, it was a name they'd been taught to fear since childhood. Centuries ago, the Jarvan, a now vanished species known for their eerie prophecies, had written of a world whose true name would echo through the stars like a death knell. In their crumbling scrolls preserved in crystal vaults across the outer rim, they described a planet that would rise quietly, speak softly, and then unleash an age of endless war so terrible it would drink the light from 1,000 suns. And the name they gave it? Terra Sanguinis. No one had taken it seriously, until now. Back on Earth, people were going about their lives completely unaware. Kids were in school, farmers were checking crops under domed greenhouses, engineers were testing new fusion drives. No one knew that 30 light-years away, their planet's forgotten nickname had just triggered a silent panic across the galaxy. Ambassador. Lin finally sensed something was off when her usual lunch partner, a friendly coral diplomat who loved Earth's pickled ginger, didn't show up. When she tried to message them, the reply came hours later. "Apologies. Urgent family matter." But the tone was stiff. Cold. Not like them at all. By evening, whispers filled the station corridors. Human delegates were being watched. Not openly, no one pointed or stared, but service bots took longer to respond to their requests. Elevator doors seemed to close a second faster when they approached. Even the ambient music in the lounge shifted to lower, more somber tones whenever a human entered. Lin tried to reach council leadership for clarification, but her requests were politely deferred. "Administrative review," they said. Nothing to worry about, but she knew better. She'd spent decades learning alien body language, the tiny tells that crossed species, and right now the galaxy was holding its breath. That night, alone in her quarters, she pulled up Earth's historical archives on her private screen. She scrolled through old texts, Roman poets mourning endless wars, medieval monks writing of plagues and crusades, 20th century headlines screaming about world wars and nuclear fire. Yes, terra sanguinis had been used, but always as a lament, never a boast. It was humanity's way of admitting, we've done terrible things. We're trying to do better. But out here, among beings who'd never seen a human cry over a lost pet or share their last piece of bread with a stranger, that nuance didn't exist. All they heard was land of blood, and their imaginations filled in the rest. She wanted to send a message home, warn them. But interstellar comms were monitored, and if she sounded alarmed, it might make things worse. So she did the only thing she could. She wrote a calm, detailed report explaining the origin of the term, attached scholarly sources, and submitted it through official channels. Then she waited. Outside her window, the stars glittered as they always had. Cold, distant, beautiful. But for the first time since humans reached the stars, those stars felt wary. No one attacked. No fleet appeared. No ultimatum was issued. And that was the scariest part. Because when a galaxy full of ancient, powerful civilizations goes quiet all at once, it's not peace they're practicing, it's fear, and fear, as Earth knew all too well from its own history, has a way of turning into something much worse, especially when no one's willing to talk. Within hours, the quiet unease aboard Harmony Prime turned into full-blown panic, but the kind that didn't shout. It whispered. It moved in shadows. It showed up in canceled meetings, delayed cargo shipments, and suddenly full dining pods that somehow had empty seats the moment a human approached. Deep in the Council's linguistic archives, teams of analysts from a dozen species huddled over ancient data crystals, cross-referencing every known dialect, dead language, and prophetic text. And there it was, again and again, the phrase terra sanguinis, not just in Earth records but in the crumbling scrolls of the Jarvon, the extinct seers whose warnings had once saved the galaxy from the swarm plague centuries ago. According to those texts, when a world bore that name, it meant the Devourer epoch was near, the time when one planet would rise not to join the galactic community, but to consume it. Not with weapons, but with chaos, with endless war, with a hunger for conflict so deep it would bleed into the stars. To most humans, this sounded like myth, but to the rest of the galaxy, prophecy wasn't just story, it was history waiting to unfold. On the Mirkan homeworld, fleet commanders scrambled silent warships into defensive orbits. The insectoid species had lost 3 colonies during the last Great War, and they weren't taking chances. Their leaders didn't believe Earth was evil, but they believed names carried power. And if Earth's true name matched the omen, then maybe, just maybe, humanity didn't even know what it was capable of yet. Meanwhile, on the ocean-covered world of Luminar, the gentle, jellyfish-like diplomats began quietly evacuating their outposts near human space. They didn't accuse. They didn't threaten. They simply moved away. Like someone stepping back from a sleeping animal they suddenly realized might be a predator. Back on Harmony Prime, Ambassador Lin Zhao noticed the change in the air. The station's usual hum of friendly chatter had thinned. Human staff were being reassigned to less sensitive duties, like maintaining hydroponic gardens or cataloging old music files. No one said why, but the message was clear: you're not trusted anymore. She tried to reach out to old allies. A Vorlag commander who'd once shared a drink with her after a tense negotiation now avoided eye contact. A Quarrel scholar who used to send her Earth poetry translations stopped replying to messages. Even the station's AI seemed to hesitate before answering her queries, as if double-checking whether she was still authorized to ask. Then came the worst moment. During a routine security scan, a human cargo vessel returning from Mars was held at the outer docking ring for 6 hours. No explanation. Just silence. When it was finally allowed in, its crew reported that every alien officer on duty had worn full bioshields, not just for contamination, but as if Earth itself might be contagious. Lynn sat in her quarters that night, staring at a small photo on her desk, a picture of her hometown, green hills under a soft blue sky, children playing near a river. It felt like a dream from another life. How could a name, spoken once in a quiet room, twist everything so fast? She replayed the moment in her head. Should she have lied? Said Earth had no old name? But that would have broken Council trust. Should she have explained more? But who would have listened once fear took hold? Down in the station's lower decks, human engineers whispered among themselves. Some were angry. "We've done nothing wrong," one muttered, tightening a bolt with more force than needed. Others were scared. "What if they decide we're too dangerous to exist?" Another asked quietly, glancing at the ceiling as if the walls had ears. And they might have. Because by the next morning, the Council had activated Protocol Theta 9, a rarely used emergency measure that allowed them to classify any world as a potential existential threat based on cultural and linguistic indicators. It had only been used twice before, once during the Swarm Wars, and once when a rogue AI planet began rewriting its own history to justify conquest. Earth wasn't under attack, but it was under suspicion. And in the silent corridors of galactic politics, suspicion could be just as deadly. Worse, rumors began to spread, wild, unverified, but terrifyingly believable. Some claimed Earth had hidden weapons in the asteroid belt. Others said human scientists were experimenting with time manipulation. A fringe news channel even aired a doctored clip of an old war documentary, splicing in alien voices claiming, "They've always been like this. They just waited until we let our guard down." Lynn knew it was nonsense, but she also knew how fear worked. She'd studied Earth's own history, how entire communities had turned on neighbors over rumors, how wars had started over misunderstandings that snowballed into catastrophe. Now that same pattern was playing out on a galactic scale, and humanity was the stranger in the room. She requested an emergency session with the Council's Ethics Committee. Her request was denied. "Not at this time," the reply read. "Further review is ongoing." She tried to send a public message to all member worlds explaining the truth behind the name, that it was a reflection of regret, not pride. But the transmission was flagged for content sensitivity and held for review. By the time it might be approved, the damage could be irreversible, and then something strange happened. A small group of young diplomats, Qatari, Quarel, even a junior Mircon officer, began meeting in secret. They weren't high-ranking. They couldn't change policy, but they'd grown up watching Earth films, listening to human music, reading translated novels about love, loss, and second chances. To them, Earth wasn't a prophecy. It was a place where people wrote songs about rain, built hospitals in war zones, and sent messages of peace into deep space just in case someone was listening. They started sharing facts quietly. Real ones. Not the fear-fueled rumors, but data. Earth's crime rates were lower than most Council worlds. Its environmental recovery programs were the most advanced in the sector. Its art, messy and emotional as it was, had moved beings from species who didn't even have tear ducts, but their voices were small. And fear was loud. As the days passed, trade routes to Sol system began to close. Medical supply ships rerouted. Cultural exchange programs were indefinitely paused. Human students at the Galactic Academy were asked to take a leave of absence for their safety. No one said Earth was guilty. But everyone acted like it might be, and the worst part, Earth still didn't know. Not really. Official channels were calm, but the silence from the Council was deafening. Back home, people saw the news, ships turning away, messages going unanswered, and started to worry. Was it a glitch? A misunderstanding? Or something darker? Ambassador Lin stood at her window again, watching a supply shuttle from a neutral world dock smoothly, its crew greeted with smiles. Then a human shuttle approached. The docking arms extended, but slowly, hesitantly, like the station itself was afraid to touch it. She closed her eyes. This wasn't war, not yet, but it was the beginning of something just as dangerous. The moment when a whole galaxy decides you're the monster in the story and stops listening to your side. And all because of two words, spoken in a language no one else really understood, but everyone suddenly feared. Back on Earth, the silence from the stars was starting to feel heavy. At first, people thought it was just a communications glitch, maybe a solar flare, maybe a software update gone wrong. But when supply ships stopped arriving, when cultural delegations were politely postponed, and when even simple data requests came back with hours of delay, the truth settled in like a cold fog. Something was very wrong out there. Governments scrambled. Scientists checked every system twice. Diplomats replayed every message, searching for a missed insult, a misunderstood gesture. Nothing stood out. Until the full transcript from Harmony Prime leaked. Not through official channels, but through a junior archivist who couldn't live with the lie anymore. That's when Earth learned the real reason. Terra Sanguinis. The old name. The forgotten phrase. Now echoing through the galaxy like a death sentence. Panic didn't break out. Not the kind with riots or chaos. Earth had been through too much for that. Instead, a quiet, determined urgency took hold. Universities opened emergency sessions. Historians, linguists, and cultural experts were called in from every continent. They gathered in virtual rooms, in underground bunkers, in quiet libraries lit only by soft lamps, trying to explain what Land of Blood really meant, not as a threat but as a confession. One scholar, an older man with tired eyes and a voice rough from decades of teaching, stood before a live feed that would be sent to every council world that would still listen. He didn't wear a uniform. He wore a simple sweater, the kind you'd see at a local cafe. He held up a fragile book, real paper yellowed with age. This, he said, is from a Roman poet 2,000 years ago. He wrote this after watching his city burn in civil war. He called Earth Terra Sanguinis not because he was proud, but because he was ashamed. He was saying, look what we've done to our home. Look how we keep hurting each other. It wasn't a warning to others. It was a plea to ourselves. He flipped the page gently. For centuries, humans used this phrase not to boast, but to remember. To remind ourselves that peace isn't automatic. That every generation has to choose it, again and again. But words, even true ones, travel slowly when fear is already racing ahead. Across the galaxy, the damage was deepening. Footage from Earth's past, real footage, was being pulled from archives and edited into terrifying montages. Black and white clips of soldiers charging across muddy fields. Grainy videos of mushroom clouds rising over cities. News reports of protests turning violent. All stitched together with ominous music and subtitles that read, "The Blood World Awakens." No context. No explanation that those events were from a time before Earth had even left its own atmosphere. No mention of the centuries of healing that followed. The treaties signed, the weapons dismantled, the forests replanted. Just blood, war, chaos, and the name, Terra Sanguinis. On neutral worlds, parents pulled their children out of schools that taught Earth history. Traders refused to handle goods labeled Made on Sol 3. A popular galactic news channel ran a segment titled, Are Humans Sleeping Wolves? Featuring so-called experts who claimed humanity's calm behavior was just evolutionary patience, a species biding its time until it was strong enough to strike. Back home, people watched these reports in disbelief. A teenager in Mumbai stared at her screen, tears in her eyes, whispering, "We just wanted to belong." A farmer in Kenya shook his head as he watered drought-resistant crops, muttering, "They think we're monsters because we made mistakes." A nurse in Buenos Aires, who'd spent her life treating patients from every corner of Earth, wondered if the galaxy would ever see that side of humanity. The quiet, everyday kindness that never made headlines. Earth's leadership knew they couldn't fight this with weapons. They didn't have a fleet big enough to challenge the Council, and even if they did, violence would only prove the galaxy's worst fears. So they chose a different path, truth, raw and unfiltered. They opened every archive, every camera feed from the last 200 years. Not just the proud moments, the moon landings, the climate summits, the first contact with dolphins, but the hard ones too. The riots, the failures, the apologies. They streamed it all, 24 hours a day on every open channel they could reach. No editing, no filters. Just humanity as it really was. Flawed, trying, sometimes failing, but always reaching for something better. At first, no one watched. Or if they did, they saw only what they expected to see. But then, something small began to shift. A quarrel student, assigned to analyze Earth's propaganda, stayed up all night watching footage of a community rebuilding after an earthquake. Aliens and humans working side by side, sharing food, singing songs in broken translations. She sent a private message to a human contact. Why would you show your pain if you were hiding something? A Mircon engineer, reviewing old trade logs, noticed that Earth had once sent emergency medical drones to a Mircon colony during a plague, without being asked, without expecting anything in return. He brought it up in a staff meeting. His commander dismissed it. But later, alone, he replayed the transmission logs himself. and on Harmony Prime, Ambassador Lin Zhao finally got a break. Not from the council, but from an unexpected place, the children of diplomats. Young ones who hadn't yet learned to fear. They'd grown up playing with human-made toys, humming Earth lullabies, drawing pictures of blue planets with green swirls. One of them, a Qatari child with shimmering skin and curious eyes, slipped a data chip into Lin's hand during a hallway encounter. On it was a message from a group of students. "We don't believe the rumors. Tell us the real story." It wasn't much, but it was a thread. Lin spent the next night recording a simple message, not as a diplomat but as a person. She spoke about her grandmother, who survived a war and still planted flowers every spring. She talked about the first time she saw Earth from space, how fragile it looked, how quiet. She didn't defend. She didn't argue. She just shared. She sent it to the students, and they, in turn, shared it quietly, with friends, with teachers, with parents who were starting to wonder if they'd been too quick to judge. Meanwhile, Earth kept broadcasting. Not speeches, not demands, just life. A classroom in Oslo learning alien languages. A jazz band in New Orleans playing for elderly residents. Volunteers cleaning plastic from the Pacific. A scientist in Antarctica watching penguins waddle past her research pod. Slowly, the narrative began to crack. Not everywhere. Not all at once. But in corners of the galaxy where curiosity hadn't been drowned out by fear, people started asking, what if we got it wrong? Because the truth was, Earth had never hidden its past. It carried its scars openly, on its land, in its stories, in its laws. And maybe that honesty, painful as it was the one thing that could save it now. But time was running out. The Council's emergency session was days away. And if they voted to label Earth a Tier 9 threat, there would be no going back. Trade would stop forever. Travel would be banned. Humanity would be locked out of the stars. Not because it did something wrong, but because the galaxy remembered a name it never meant to keep. The silence from the Council stretched longer than anyone expected. No official statements, no emergency broadcast, just a quiet, heavy stillness that felt more dangerous than any declaration of war. On Earth, people held their breath. In spaceports, cargo ships sat idle. In schools, lessons about the stars felt hollow, like teaching children about a door that might never open for them again. Then, without warning, something strange happened on the far edge of known space. On Xylos 9, a dead moon orbiting a quiet red star. Ancient ruins long thought to be inactive suddenly lit up. The Jarvan had built them thousands of years ago. Towers of black stone covered in spiraling glyphs, silent for centuries. But that night energy surged through them. Beams of crimson light shot into the sky, and a massive hologram appeared above the ruins. A planet red as rust, spinning slowly in the void. And beneath it, glowing in jagged, archaic script, were two words, Terra Sanguinis. The image lasted only 17 seconds before the ruins went dark again. But in that time, it was captured by a dozen deep space observatories, relayed across every news channel, and shared billions of times in under an hour. To most of the galaxy, it wasn't a coincidence. It was confirmation. The prophecy was real. The warning had awakened. Earth wasn't just a name. It was a sign. Panic spread faster than light. The Vorlag military doubled patrols near human space. The Luminary recalled all their deep space explorers. Even neutral trade worlds began quietly removing Earth products from shelves, as if the very idea of human-made goods had become tainted. On Harmony Prime, human diplomats were confined to their quarters for their own protection. Food was delivered through sealed hatches. Comms were restricted. It wasn't imprisonment, but it felt like it. Back on Earth, scientists scrambled to explain the Xylos 9 event. Within hours, they had an answer. A rare solar flare from a nearby star had hit the moon's magnetic field at just the right angle, triggering a dormant power core in the ruins. The hologram wasn't a message, it was a glitch. A cosmic accident, like static on an old radio playing a ghost of a song no one meant to send. But by the time the report was ready, no one was listening. Fear doesn't wait for facts. It runs ahead, building walls before the storm even arrives. Earth's leaders sent the explanation anyway, calm, detailed, backed by data from 3 independent observatories. They included simulations, energy readings, even a timeline showing how the flare matched the activation. But the message bounced back with a single line, under review. Meanwhile, the Council prepared for its final vote. Tier 9 designation. the highest threat level. Once applied, it couldn't be undone for a century. Earth would be cut off, not just from trade, but from knowledge, from culture, from any hope of being seen as anything other than what the galaxy now believed it to be. Ambassador Lin Zhao sat alone in her dimly lit quarters, staring at a small screen showing live feeds from home, a street festival in Lisbon, children laughing in a Tokyo park, fishermen hauling nets at dawn in Vietnam. Normal life. Beautiful, ordinary life, and none of it mattered if the galaxy had already decided humanity's story for them. She thought about sending one last message, not to officials, but to the people. To the students, the artists, the quiet ones who still believed in connection. But what could she say? We're not what you think? They'd heard that before. Give us a chance? They'd stopped believing chances existed then. An idea came not from strategy but from memory. Years ago, during her first cultural exchange, she'd shared a simple Earth tradition with a group of young diplomats. The time capsule. A box filled with everyday objects, photos, letters, a seashell, a piece of bread, buried to be opened by future generations. It wasn't about grand history. It was about showing what life felt like in a single moment. What if Earth sent a time capsule? Not into the ground, but into the stars. Not with data, not with arguments, but with real things. A child's drawing, a recording of rain, a seed from a tree that grew after a wildfire, a handwritten note that said, "We're trying." She pitched the idea through back channels. To her surprise, a few quiet allies listened. A Corel archivist, a Mir Khan technician, even the Qatari archivist who'd started this whole chain of events sent a single-word reply. Send it. So Earth prepared its capsule, not as a plea, but as a gift. No demands, no expectations, just a box of ordinary things that said, "This is who we are when no one's watching." But before it could launch, the council made its move. The vote was scheduled for dawn station time. As the hours ticked down, Lynn watched the corridors outside her door. More guards, tighter security. The air felt thick like the moment before lightning strikes. Then, a knock. Not from security. From a young Qatari intern, barely out of training, holding a small device. "They're not letting messages through," the intern whispered through the translator. "But I found a gap in the maintenance feed." "You have 30 seconds, Lynn didn't hesitate. She recorded a voice note, just 10 words. "We remember our blood. That's why we choose peace." The intern nodded, slipped the device into a utility panel and vanished. It wasn't much, but in a galaxy drowning in fear, sometimes a single sentence is enough to plant a seed. As the council chamber doors sealed for the final session, Earth held its breath. Not with weapons ready, not with anger, but with open hands and a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would look past the name and see the people behind it. Because the truth was, humanity had never stopped reaching out. Even now, even when the stars turned cold, they kept sharing music, kept sending messages into the void, kept planting trees they'd never sit under. And if that wasn't proof of something good, then maybe nothing ever would be. The vote was supposed to be secret. Closed doors, sealed records, no leaks. But in a place like Harmony Prime, where even the walls seemed to hum with gossip, silence was the loudest sound of all. When the council chamber doors finally opened after 12 long hours, no one stepped out smiling. No one stepped out angry either. They just walked, slowly, quietly, as if carrying something heavy no one else could see. Earth waited. Not with weapons raised, not with protests, but with eyes fixed on the stars, hearts pounding in the dark. Then, a single message came through, short, formal, but clear. The Tier 9 designation had not passed. Not by much, but enough. Relief didn't come like a wave. It came like the first breath after holding it too long, shaky, quiet, real. But the victory wasn't in the vote. It was in what came after. A young Qatari linguist, barely older than a student, had spent weeks digging through the original Jarvan scrolls, not in translation, but in the raw glyphs. And she found something no one else had noticed. The phrase everyone read as Land of Blood was actually a mistranslation. The ancient symbol for sanguinis didn't just mean blood, it also meant sacrifice, offering, or what is given up. In context, the full phrase wasn't a warning of violence. It was a lament for loss, a recognition of pain endured, not inflicted. Her paper spread quietly at first, among scholars, then students, then diplomats, who'd been too afraid to speak up before. It didn't erase the fear overnight, but it gave people a reason to doubt it. And doubt, when it's honest, can be the beginning of understanding. Slowly, carefully, the galaxy began to look again. Trade ships didn't rush back, but one or two started making cautious stops at the edge of Sol space, just to check if Earth was still there, still human, still offering tea to visitors like it always had. Cultural channels reopened, not with fanfare but with small gestures. A luminary poet sharing verses about healing, a Mircon engineer asking for help repairing an old Earth-designed reactor. And Earth? Earth didn't gloat, didn't say, "I told you so." Instead, it did what it had always done best. It showed up. Schools began inviting alien students back, not as observers but as friends. Scientists shared climate data freely, even with species that had once called them monsters. Artists collaborated on projects that blended Earth melodies with galactic harmonies, creating something new that belonged to no one world and everyone at once. But the biggest change happened in the name. At the next council session, this time with human delegates seated at the table, not outside it, Earth made a quiet announcement. From now on, in all official records, treaties, and communications, the planet would be listed simply as Desalthrine. No old names, no poetry, just a star and a number, clean, clear, neutral. It wasn't because they were ashamed of their past. It was because they understood now how words could wound, even when spoken with care. And if a name could scare an entire galaxy, maybe it was time to let it rest. The council accepted the change without comment, but behind the scenes something deeper shifted. A new rule was drafted. No world would ever again be judged by a single phrase, a forgotten title, or a mistranslated prophecy. Language, they agreed, was too fragile for fate. Back home, life returned to something like normal, but not quite. People walked a little taller, not with pride, but with quiet resolve. They knew now how easily they could be misunderstood, how quickly fear could twist truth. So they chose their words more carefully. They listened more. They shared more. Children grew up learning not just Earth's history, but the story of the great misunderstanding, the time the galaxy heard a name and saw a monster, but looked again and found neighbors. Years later, on a clear night, you could stand outside any city on Earth and look up. The stars were the same, but they felt different, closer, kinder, because humanity had learned something important. Belonging isn't given. It's earned, not by being perfect, but by being honest, even when it hurts. And out in the galaxy, in quiet corners of space stations and distant academies, you'd sometimes hear an old phrase whispered, not with fear, but with respect. Terra sanguinis. Not as a warning, but as a reminder, every world carries scars. What matters is what you build over them. Earth didn't become a galactic power. It didn't lead fleets or rewrite laws, but it became something rarer, trusted. Not because it was flawless, but because it never stopped trying to be better. And sometimes, late at night, when the comms channels were quiet and the stars burned steady, a human voice would still send a simple message into the dark, not for answers, but just to say we're still here, still listening, still hoping, because in the end that's all any of us ever really want, to be seen not as a name but as a person. And Earth, after everything, had finally been seen.